April 1992. Sam Walton is dying. He is in a hospital bed in Little Rock, Arkansas. 74 years old. He has multiple myeloma, a cancer of the plasma cells, and the doctors have told him what doctors tell you when there is nothing left to do. In his hands are that week's Walmart store sales reports. Not a memoir. Not a letter to his family. Not a photograph album from 47 years of building something from nothing. The week's store sales reports. He is reviewing them the way he has reviewed them every week of his adult life. Outside, in the driveway of a house in Bentonville, Arkansas, sits a rusted 1979 Ford F-150 pickup truck. Sam Walton's truck. He drove it himself. To the store. To the warehouse. To the airstrip. To competitors' stores where he would walk the aisles and ask the clerks how they ordered inventory. He was the richest self-made man in America for most of the 1980s. He changed nothing. Same truck. 12 days before he dies, the President of the United States will fly to Bentonville to give him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. George Bush will fly to the man because the man is too sick to travel to Washington. This is what power looks like at the end of a life spent ignoring it. 2 years after Walton dies, in 1994, in Seattle, a man named Jeff Bezos is sitting at a desk with a copy of Made in America in front of him. It will stay on his desk for years. His early shareholder letters will echo Walton's operating principles in language too specific to be coincidental. The obsession with the customer over the competitor. The willingness to be misunderstood for long periods while building a structural advantage. The insistence on building infrastructure before the returns justify it. Bezos took Walton's doctrine and applied it to a different medium. In February 2026, Amazon surpassed Walmart as the world's largest company by revenue for the first time in history. $716.9 billion to $713.2 billion. The gap was $3.7 billion. The student had surpassed the teacher. This episode is the story of how that machine was built, what it cost, and what it means that the person who understood it best never worked for Walmart, never met Sam Walton, and learned everything from a book. The written companion document for this episode, covering all 10 founder stories in full detail, plus the complete psychology, strategy, and financial analysis, is in the link in the description below. Now, let's go back to where this all started. Sam Walton was born in 1918 in Kingfisher, Oklahoma, into the middle of the Great Depression. This is not background detail. It is the explanation for almost every decision he made for the next 70 years. A childhood spent watching his family's income disappear taught Walton two things that never left him. First, nothing is guaranteed. The business that looks stable today can be gone by next year. Second, a penny saved is not a cliché. It is survival arithmetic. His father moved the family between farms and towns across Missouri throughout Walton's childhood. Walton sold magazine subscriptions, delivered milk before school, and saved aggressively. By the time he graduated from the University of Missouri in 1940, he had enough for a deposit on an entry-level retail management position at a J.C. Penney store in Des Moines, Iowa. He lasted 18 months before being drafted into the Army in 1942. He came back from the war in 1945 with two things: a young wife named Helen, whose father Leland Robson was a prosperous farmer and businessman, and an absolute conviction that he was going to own a retail store. Helen's father lent him $20,000. Walton added $5,000 of his own. He bought a failing Ben Franklin 5-and-dime franchise in a small town in Arkansas, in a building he did not own, on a lease he had not read carefully enough. That decision, and what it cost him, built Walmart. Before we get into the stories, you need the landscape Walton was building inside. Because the forces that shaped his first decade were not just competitors. They were teachers. Kmart was Walton's curriculum. The Kmart chain grew out of the S.S. Kresge Company, which had operated low-cost variety stores since 1912. In the early 1960s, Kresge launched Kmart as a standalone discount brand, backed by institutional capital and a city-first expansion strategy. Within 5 years of opening its first store, Kmart had 250 locations. It was efficient, well-financed, and built for scale in urban markets. Walton studied it obsessively and borrowed from it without shame. What he also saw, watching Kmart grow, was a company that had made a structural decision he intended to exploit. Kmart had decided that small towns, communities of 5,000 or 10,000 people, were simply not worth the effort. That decision left a territory unmapped and undefended. Walton moved into it. Sears was the slower machine. It had been the dominant retailer in America since the late 19th century, built on catalog shopping and eventually on suburban anchor stores. By the 1960s, it was enormous, profitable, and deeply institutional. Sears moved slowly. It changed prices seasonally. Its store layouts were designed for browsing, not for efficiency. Walton looked at Sears the way a student looks at a textbook. He understood what it had built, and he understood, with increasing certainty, what it had stopped being able to see. The Ben Franklin franchise network was both Walton's entry point and his cage. Butler Brothers operated the system and required franchisees to buy at least 80% of their merchandise from Butler Brothers at Butler Brothers prices. The margins were fixed. The sourcing was restricted. And the territory rules prevented Walton from expanding beyond what Butler Brothers considered acceptable. He learned retail inside this system for 15 years. He became its best operator. And he learned, precisely, everything the system could not do. There is one more figure who belongs in this section. And his relationship with Walton is unlike any of the others, because he did not compete with Walton. He educated him. Sol Price opened the first Price Club in San Diego in 1976. It was a membership warehouse. You paid an annual fee for the right to enter the store. Inside, goods were priced at near wholesale, 30 to 40% cheaper than any regular retailer. Price understood that the membership fee, which cost almost nothing to collect, could be the entire profit margin of the business, while the merchandise operated at near break-even. It was a completely different business model from anything that existed in American retail. Walton studied it from a distance for nearly a decade. Then he flew to San Diego for dinner. We will come back to that dinner. September 1st, 1945. Sam Walton walks into a failing Ben Franklin 5-and-dime store in Newport, Arkansas. He has $5,000 of his own money and $20,000 borrowed from his father-in-law. The store is a mess. Butler Brothers could not sell it to anyone else. Within 3 years, Walton has turned it into the most profitable Ben Franklin store in the entire 6-state region. Sales have gone from $72,000 a year to $250,000. He has learned retail from the floor up, pricing, inventory, supplier relationships, foot traffic. He is 29 years old, and he has just figured it out. And then his landlord makes a phone call. The landlord's name is P.K. Holmes. Holmes has been receiving rent calculated as 5% of sales, because that is what the lease says. When Walton arrived, 5% was roughly $3,600 a year. Now it is $12,500. Holmes has done nothing to earn that increase. He has simply owned the building while Walton worked inside it. Holmes has a son. The son wants a store. The lease has no renewal clause, a detail Walton had not thought to demand when he signed it. Eager to get started, Holmes refuses to renew. He offers to purchase the inventory and fixtures from Walton for $50,000, which Walton himself calls a fair price, and hand the whole operation to his son. Walton is legally helpless. He has built the most profitable Ben Franklin in 6 states inside a building he does not own, on a lease he cannot extend, for a landlord who has decided there is no particular reason to be content with 5% of something when he could have 100% of it all in the family. He was sick to his stomach. He said so. He had to drive around the county to keep from crying. Then he packed his fixtures into a truck and drove it out of Newport on a back dirt road to avoid a way station, because he knew the load was illegal several different ways, and bounced across the ruts toward Bentonville. Half the fixtures were torn up by the time he arrived. 1969. 19 years after Walton had been run out of Newport, Walmart number 18 opened on the edge of town. He had not been back as a merchant in all those years. He later described what happened. By then, he said, he was long over what had happened there, and he didn't have revenge in mind. The store opened. It did extraordinarily well. And within a few years, the old Ben Franklin on Front Street, the one Holmes had taken for his son, had closed its doors. Walton said, "You can't say we ran that guy out of business." His customers were the ones who shut him down. They voted with their feet. He said it without apparent satisfaction. What the 19-year return makes plain is something about the nature of what had been taken. Holmes had bought the machine. He had not bought the person who knew how to run it. The customers voted with their feet, not because they turned against Holmes, but because wherever Walton was building, that was where they wanted to be. The Newport disaster was not a business failure. Walton's business had succeeded completely. The disaster was structural. It happened because Walton had built enormous value inside someone else's legal position. He had made the founder's most dangerous mistake, building a winning business on a foundation he did not control. What he took from Newport was not bitterness. It was a precise, architectural lesson. Never build value inside a structure you don't own. The entire Walmart expansion strategy, own the warehouse, own the trucks, own the distribution, saturate the territory so completely that no individual landlord or supplier holds decisive leverage, is a direct answer to Newport. Every piece of infrastructure Walmart built for 40 years was a vote against ever being in that position again. Step back and consider what Newport actually reveals. Content creators who built their entire audience on a single platform and woke up to an algorithm change in 2019 were in Newport. App developers who built businesses inside a marketplace that changed its terms overnight were in Newport. The lesson is not paranoia. It is urgency. The time to diversify your structural foundation is before you need to. Walton arrived in Bentonville not defeated but clarified. He would spend the next 40 years making structural vulnerability structurally impossible. Notice also the 19-year return. He did not go back to Newport angry. He went back with a better machine. The competitor who dismisses you because your starting conditions look weak has made the same mistake Holmes made. He has confused the current moment with the final result. Walton left Newport permanently defeated and arrived in Bentonville permanently clear about one thing. The first thing he did was make sure Newport could never happen to him again. And the person who made that possible was not a bank, and not an investor, and not a business partner. May 9, 1950. Walton's Five and Dime opens on the Bentonville town square. The story of how it got there belongs to a man the official history treats as a footnote. Leland Robson, Walton's father-in-law, had already lent Sam the $20,000 that made Newport possible. Now, when the owner of the building Walton wants in Bentonville refuses to sell, refuses 6 times over several months, Robson solves the problem without being asked. He approaches the owner independently and pays $20,000 for a 99-year lease on the property, then hands it to Sam without ceremony. The son-in-law who just lost everything to a bad lease clause now has a 99-year lease that no one can take from him for the rest of his working life. Walton puts a popcorn machine and an ice cream machine out front, not to make money on popcorn, because people standing eating ice cream on a hot day are people standing on his corner. Foot traffic generators before the term existed. And here is the figure the official story rarely gives proper space to. Walton's brother Bud, 3 years younger, quieter, steadier, co-signs the early loans alongside Sam when no bank will extend credit to a 32-year-old who has just handed back the keys to his best store. Bud flies Sam between stores in a small plane as the operation expands across Arkansas and then across state lines. He runs stores alongside Sam for decades. He co-founds Walmart and remains a significant shareholder. History, in the way that history always does with founders' siblings, has largely erased him from the story. He was beside Sam at every critical moment of the first 20 years. The 99-year lease was not just practical protection. It was a signal, to Walton himself, that the foundation beneath this store could never be pulled out by anyone. He would never feel what he felt in Newport again if he could help it. This is the DNA of every infrastructure decision Walmart made for the next 40 years. Own it. Control it. Do not build your value on someone else's permission. When you see the decision to build Walmart's own distribution centers, its own trucking fleet, its own satellite network, you are seeing the 99-year lease at scale. Newport taught the lesson once. The 99-year lease was the first answer. Everything that followed was the rest of the answer. Walton was back in business. But the question he could not stop asking was larger than one store. He wanted to know if there was a model for retail that could beat the established chains at their own game. And to understand that, he needed to study the competition. Not from a distance. Not from industry reports. From the floor. Sometime in the late 1960s, Don Soderquist, who will later become Walmart's vice chairman, is shopping in a competitor's store in the American Midwest. He hears a familiar voice. He follows it around a display fixture. Sam Walton is on his hands and knees in the aisle, examining the underside of a merchandise shelf. He is not visiting as a competitor. He is learning. He asks the store manager detailed questions about inventory turns, about which products are moving and which are sitting. The manager answers because Walton is warm and curious and gives no indication that he is about to go home and implement everything he has just heard. Walton visited hundreds of competitor stores this way across 4 decades. He visited Kmart stores, Target stores, Sears stores, regional chains nobody outside a 3-state area had ever heard of. He took notes. He asked questions. He had his managers do the same. Walmart people were instructed to bring back at least one useful idea from every competitor visit, every trip, every conference they attended. The practice went further than store visits. Walton's team retrieved discarded documents from competitors' dumpsters, operational manuals, supplier contracts, pricing notes, information that was not secret but that competitors had simply thrown away without thinking about who might read it. And when Walton flew to San Diego to visit a price club, the staff confiscated a tape recorder they found in his pocket at the entrance. He had 19 planes over the course of his career. The first 400 to 500 Walmart store locations were chosen from the cockpit. Walton would fly over a town, assess the road access, the population density, the proximity to the nearest distribution point, and make a decision. He knew his territory from the air before his competitors had a map of it at ground level. Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's partner at Berkshire Hathaway, once described Walton's approach to competitive intelligence as the most systematic he had ever observed in business. Munger said that Walton had an almost algorithmic approach to absorbing what worked from every source available to him, regardless of where it came from or who it belonged to. Consider what this habit compounded into over time. Every store visit produced at least one useful idea. Every useful idea, implemented across hundreds of stores, produced a measurable advantage. The knowledge did not accumulate linearly. It compounded. By the time Kmart understood how far behind they had fallen, Walton had a decade's worth of their own best practices already running inside Walmart. They had educated him. He had not returned the favor. One more detail worth noting. Walton never went looking for what competitors were doing badly. He went looking for what they were doing brilliantly. The two searches feel similar. They produce completely different results. One confirms what you already believe. The other makes you better. Before we get into how Walton finally broke free of the franchise system entirely, I want to mention the written companion document for this episode. Everything we have covered so far, the Newport disaster in full, the 99-year lease, the mechanics of the competitor intelligence system, is in the written document in the description below. 10 complete founder stories, the full psychology analysis, what the empire looks like financially today, and what Walton would specifically do in 2026. It is there every time you want to go deeper. The link is in the description below for less than the price of a coffee. Now, let's get to the moment Walton broke free. By 1961, Walton knew more about discount retail than anyone in the Ben Franklin system. And he knew, with certainty, that the Ben Franklin system was the wrong vehicle for what he wanted to build. So he went to Chicago and made his pitch. He sits down with Butler Brothers executives. He asks them to let the franchise network convert to a discount model, cut the wholesale margin, give stores pricing flexibility. He has the numbers to back it. His stores are the most profitable in the entire system. They say no. The margins are too thin. The model does not work at the franchise level. He pitches other potential partners. Same answer every time. Nobody in the established system wants to bet on small-town discount retail when Kmart and Target are scaling in cities with institutional capital behind them. He later said the rejection made him a little angry, and that the anger helped him decide. He mortgages his house. He borrows everything his brother Bud can raise. On July 2nd, 1962, he opens the first Walmart in Rogers, Arkansas. He is 44 years old. Kmart opens its first store the same year. Target opens the same year. Both are backed by large corporations with financial infrastructure Walton cannot approach. Within 5 years, Kmart has 250 stores. Walmart has 19. David Glass, the man who will later become Walmart's chief executive and take revenue from $16 billion to $165 billion, stands in the parking lot of the third Walmart store in Springdale, watches the opening day chaos, and leaves thinking the company has no future. He is not wrong about what he saw. He is completely wrong about what it will become. When every established player in an industry rejects your idea, they are not telling you the idea is wrong. They are telling you where the opportunity is. Their rejection is a map. The question is whether you can read it. If Butler Brothers had said yes, Walton would have spent the next decade trying to reform a franchise system from inside. The no forced him to build something clean, from scratch, with no obligations to anyone else's model. He could set prices freely. He could source directly. He could design the entire operation around his own logic. The rejection was a forcing function. James Dyson spent 15 years being told that vacuum cleaners already worked fine. Bezos was told that physical bookstores already worked fine. Walton was told that franchise retail already worked fine. All three built the thing the establishment said there was no room for. The pattern is consistent enough that it is worth asking. Where in your own industry has the establishment decided something is not worth doing? That gap is almost certainly worth investigating. The first Walmart was open, but Walton still faced a question no one had answered. How do you serve a customer 4 hours from the nearest city who has never had access to real discount pricing? And how do you do it at scale before Kmart figures out that you're claiming territory they decided was beneath them? Every major retailer in America in 1962 is building in cities. Kmart, Sears, Target, Woolco, all of them have made the same calculation. Density means foot traffic. Foot traffic means volume. Volume makes the unit economics of a large store work. The logic is sound. It has been proven at scale, and it contains a strategic flaw that will not be visible for another decade. Walton looks at this logic and inverts it. His insight is not that cities are wrong. His insight is that cities are already occupied. If Walmart enters cities, it enters direct competition with better capitalized companies on their territory. The math of that competition is bad for Walmart at its current size. But the towns of 5,000 people? Nobody is there. His expansion model works like this. Build a distribution warehouse in a central location. Calculate the maximum distance a truck can travel from that warehouse in 1 day and return. Open stores at the outer edge of that radius. Then fill in the territory between the warehouse and the outer stores, town by town, until you have saturated the area so completely that a competitor entering any single town faces dozens of Walmart stores within 100 miles. When Kmart eventually came to Springfield, Missouri, Walton had 40 stores in the surrounding area. Kmart opened 3. It could not compete on price because it could not match Walmart's distribution efficiency at that density. He also chooses locations on the periphery of growing cities, in the direction the population is expanding, not in the city. At its edge, after a few years, the city grows out to those locations. Walmart ends up with populated, valuable real estate it purchased cheaply years before the population arrived. The city comes to Walmart. The customers in small towns were not less valuable than customers in cities. They were more loyal. When Walmart arrived in a town that had never had access to name-brand goods at discount prices, the response was not mild appreciation. It was something closer to devotion. People drove an hour to shop there because there was nothing else like it within 4 hours of home. Airbnb did not compete with hotels directly at launch. It went to hosts and guests the hotel industry had decided were not worth serving. Spotify did not go after the radio listener first. It went to the music pirate, the person the music industry had given up on. The small-town Gambit is not a retail strategy. It is a universal playbook. Find the customer the incumbents have decided is beneath them, serve them extraordinarily well, and build scale in that territory before the incumbents realize what they have walked away from. The small-town strategy worked, but it created a problem Walton had not fully anticipated. The more stores you open, the harder it becomes to know what is happening inside each one. Kmart's executives received their Monday morning sales data on Monday morning. By then, Walton had already acted on his. This is the story of how. Every Saturday morning, at 7:30, Sam Walton holds a meeting. He has been holding this meeting since 1962, the year Walmart opened. He is almost always the first to arrive. Not at 7:15, not at 7. He gets there at 3 in the morning, sometimes earlier, and spends the pre-dawn hours reviewing the week's numbers alone before anyone else walks in the door. By 7:30, his regional managers, buyers, and senior staff are in the room. And what happens next is unlike any corporate meeting in American business history. The meeting runs until noon, sometimes longer. Every region reports in real time. Buyers who are making decisions about which products to stock here, on the same morning, exactly how those products are performing in stores across the country. A store manager in Texas can flag a problem and have a solution committed by 9 in the morning. An idea that worked in one region can be approved for system-wide rollout before the meeting ends. Walton brings in an employee one Saturday. His name is Andy Wilson, a truck driver. Walton has heard, through his network of store visits and driver conversations, that Wilson had an observation about how loading sequences at one distribution center were creating delays. Wilson stands in front of the entire senior leadership team and describes what he saw. It is implemented across the network within 2 weeks. This is what the Saturday meeting actually is. Not a performance review, not a status update. A real-time intelligence system that compressed the gap between knowing and doing to less than 48 hours. People came to observe this meeting the way they might visit an unusual natural phenomenon. Warren Buffett attended. Henry Kissinger attended. Herb Kelleher, the founder of Southwest Airlines, attended and said it was the most impressive business meeting he had ever seen. Bill Clinton, before he was president, came to Bentonville specifically to understand what Walton was doing and why it was working. David Glass described it as part evangelical revival, part Oscars ceremony, part Broadway show. The energy was not manufactured. It was the natural result of people who had been working all week, bringing their best observations into a room that rewarded clarity and speed. In 2008, the Saturday meeting was reduced to monthly frequency. In 2014, it was made optional. We will come back to what that decision cost. Information that decays in value the older it gets is not information. It is history. Walton treated sales data as a perishable asset. The Saturday meeting was his refrigerator. Remove the refrigerator and everything spoils. The successors who dismantled the meeting were making the machine more comfortable to run. They were simultaneously making it less capable of seeing what was coming. Those two things do not always feel like a trade-off until it is too late. The Saturday meeting gave Walton real-time intelligence from his own stores. But the competitive infrastructure that would define Walmart's ultimate advantage was being built not in the boardroom, but in the warehouse network, on land no competitor had looked at twice. By the early 1970s, Walton has identified the single most important structural insight in his entire business career. It is not about pricing. It is not about store locations. It is about distribution. Walmart's distribution cost, properly managed, could become a competitive moat that no competitor could breach once it was built. Because Walmart operated in small towns, far from the urban distribution hubs that competitors had built around cities, it had been forced, from the beginning, to solve its own logistics problem. Suppliers who served Kmart and Sears had established routes built around city-based stores. Walton's stores were not on those routes. He could not rely on the existing infrastructure. So he builds his own. The first Walmart-owned distribution center opens in 1971 in Bentonville. It is a deliberate choice to build the warehouse before it is needed at full capacity, to invest in infrastructure that will enable the next decade of expansion rather than scramble to build it in response to stores already open. His critics inside the organization see it as premature spending on a scale the business cannot justify. He overrides them. The private trucking fleet grows alongside the distribution centers. By the 1980s, Walmart operates the largest private trucking fleet in the United States. Walton recruits drivers not just as logistics capacity, but as intelligence gatherers. Drivers who move between dozens of stores every week know things about which managers are running their operations well, which distribution paths are creating delays, what competitors are doing in the markets they pass through. Walton treats drivers as field agents and makes sure they know they are valued for what they know, not just what they carry. Then, in 1987, Walton completes what is at the time the largest private satellite communication network in the United States. It costs $24 million. The decision is not universally popular inside Walmart. The margins can barely support it. Walton forces it through on the grounds that the alternative, not having real-time visibility into every store, is a competitive vulnerability he is not willing to accept. On January 11, 1988, Walton and David Glass go on camera together to announce the network is live. They broadcast to all 1,200 stores simultaneously and lead the assembled employees in the Walmart cheer over satellite. This is 1988. There is no internet, no video calls, no mobile phones with cameras. Walton has just built the communication infrastructure of a company a decade before the technology to make it conventional exists. The savings are immediate, 20 to 30% on telecommunications costs. But the financial saving is secondary. When the stock of a product at any store hits a reorder point, an automated signal goes directly to the supplier, not to a distribution manager, not to a buyer in Bentonville, directly to the supplier, in real time, without human intermediation. The shelf replenishes itself. By 1989, Walmart's distribution cost has fallen to 1.7% of total sales. Kmart's is approximately double that rate. On $30 billion in sales, 1 percentage point is $300 million. Walton is extracting $300 million annually from his competitors through logistics efficiency alone, without charging 1 penny less to customers to generate it. Sam Walton once told Fred Smith, the founder of FedEx, that Walmart was a better logistics company than a retail company. Smith reportedly agreed without hesitation. Distribution is not a supporting function. In a cost-competitive business, it is the primary competitive weapon. The company that builds its logistics infrastructure before it needs it will outcompete the company that builds it in response to losing. This is the machine Walton is building, not a retail chain. A machine for moving things from one place to another faster and cheaper than anyone else can, and a machine for knowing, in real time, exactly where everything is and what it costs. By the time Kmart's consultants had produced a report on what Walmart was doing differently, Walton had already been doing it for 5 years. The gap was not visible from the outside until it was uncrossable from the inside. Bezos read Made in America and built Amazon's fulfillment network on the same logic. Build the infrastructure before the scale demands it. Operate at near-zero margin until the structural position is uncrossable. Make the customer experience so good that no competitor can match it without having started 10 years earlier. The doctrine was the same. The medium was different. We will come back to this. The satellite network gave Walton something he had never had before, the ability to see every store simultaneously. And now he had a new question, one that had been forming over 2 decades of watching someone he admired build something he had not yet attempted. That question had its answer waiting in San Diego. Early 1983. Sam and Helen Walton fly to San Diego. They have dinner with Sol Price and his wife at a restaurant in the city. Price is polite. The conversation is warm. At no point during the evening does Walton tell Price what he is thinking. What he is thinking is that he is going to copy the Price Club model. Walton later wrote about this with unusual directness. He said, "I admit it. I didn't tell him at the time that I was going to copy his program, but that's what I did." He went further. "I guess I've stolen. I actually prefer the word borrowed, as many ideas from Sol Price as from anybody else in the business." Price later learned what had happened. When a journalist asked him how it felt to be the father of warehouse retail, the model that produced both Costco and Sam's Club, Sol Price considered the question for a moment and replied, "I wish I'd worn a condom." Price had invented the membership warehouse club in 1976. The model worked like this. You pay a flat annual fee, say $50, for the right to enter the store at all. Non-members cannot shop there. And inside the store, goods are priced at near wholesale, 30 to 40% cheaper than any regular retailer. A family spending $1,000 a year on groceries at a supermarket might spend $600 at a Price Club. The $50 fee pays for itself in the first 2 or 3 visits. The genius for the business is where the profit actually sits. The merchandise is priced to barely cover costs. Almost no markup. The store makes almost nothing on the goods themselves. But the membership fee, which costs the club almost nothing to collect, flows straight to profit. 90 cents of every fee dollar is margin. The fee is the entire business model. And the commitment is behavioral. Someone who has paid $50 for access needs to shop there frequently enough to justify that $50. You are not just buying a product. You are protecting a sunk cost. The fee does not just generate revenue. It generates loyalty that no discount alone can manufacture. Walton flies back to Bentonville. He finds a derelict industrial building in Midwest City, Oklahoma, rented for roughly 85 cents per square foot. The roof leaks. The concrete floors are cracked. He gives his team 3 months. The first Sam's Club opens in April 1983. By the end of the first year, 3 clubs have opened and generated $40 million in combined sales. Sam's Club carries under 5,000 items, compared to over 100,000 in a typical Walmart store. The membership fee is essentially the entire profit margin. Sales revenue barely covers the cost of goods and labor. But the story of what Walton built versus what the Price Club eventually became tells you something important about depth of commitment. Costco today generates $5.3 billion in membership fees alone, on which the margin approaches 90%. Sam's Club consolidated its private labels only in 2017, 22 years behind Costco's equivalent move. Walton saw the model correctly in 1983. The full realization of that model belongs to the company that never stopped deepening it. Copying a model is not the same as executing it fully. You can replicate the mechanism without replicating the depth of commitment that makes the mechanism reach its ceiling. Walton saw the Price Club idea correctly. The membership model's complete execution belongs to Costco. There is something quietly telling about the Soul Price dinner. The most powerful retailer in America flew to San Diego, sat across the table from the man who had invented a model he intended to copy, and never mentioned it. It was not legally dishonest, but it reveals something about how Walton's competitive obsession operated. Learning from the best was a discipline. Acknowledging it was optional. He borrowed more ideas from Soul Price than from anyone else in business. Price found out from a journalist. You cannot fault Walton for learning. You can at least note that the people he learned from did not always know they were teaching. That is the honest accounting of the Soul Price chapter. Both the brilliance of the copy and the silence of the dinner held simultaneously. And now, before we get to the final act of this story, if you want everything we have covered today in a document you can return to, here is where to find it. Everything we have covered today, the Newport disaster in full, the 47 years of competitor intelligence, the Saturday morning meeting, the satellite network, the Soul Price dinner, the full accounting of the Walmart effect, all of it is in the written companion document for this episode. 10 complete founder stories, the full psychology section, the 5 phases of strategy evolution, what the empire looks like today, and what Walton would specifically do in 2026. It is there every time you want to return to it. The link is in the description below, for less than the price of a coffee. Now, let's talk about the person who read Walton's memoir and built something Walmart's own successors could not. Walmart's pricing model worked. That is not in dispute. The academic evidence on what Walmart's entry into a market does to consumer prices is consistent. Prices go down, typically by 5 to 13% on the goods Walmart sells. For a family in a rural town spending most of their income on groceries, household goods, and clothing, that difference is real money. Walton understood this and believed it deeply. He called it the democratization of retail. He was not wrong that the benefit was real. What he did not examine as carefully was the other side of the ledger. When Walmart opened in a small town, it did not just compete with the existing retailers. It typically eliminated them. The local hardware store, the family-owned clothing shop, the independent grocery, businesses that had been the economic anchors of main streets for generations, could not match Walmart's prices because they could not match Walmart's scale, its distribution infrastructure, or its supplier leverage. They closed. The people who owned them lost their livelihoods. Main streets hollowed out within a decade. In many of the towns Walmart entered in the 1970s and 80s, the commercial district that had organized community life for generations became a series of vacant storefronts within 5 years of the Walmart opening on the highway outside town. The wages Walmart paid to replace those livelihoods were systematically lower. The jobs were structurally different, part-time, with limited benefits, designed to keep workers below the threshold that would trigger full-time employment obligations. Walton had an answer for the wage criticism. The lower prices Walmart charged saved those same workers more money than the wage difference cost them. He believed this. The arithmetic was partly true, but believing it required not looking too closely at the specific human cost. The business owner who had spent 30 years building something and lost it in 3. The manufacturing supplier forced to move production overseas to meet Walmart's unrelenting price demands. The town that lost not just retail, but the social fabric that retail anchors. Walton visited the towns Walmart had entered and saw what he wanted to see. Customers who were spending less and getting more. He did not spend much time with the hardware store owner whose business had failed. He was not constitutionally inclined toward that kind of looking. His entire operating system was built around optimizing for the customer. The costs that did not show up in his customer's wallet did not show up in his mental model of what Walmart was doing to the world. Bob Ortega's unauthorized biography, In Sam We Trust, documents in detail what Made in America declines to engage with. Charles Fishman's The Walmart Effect is the most rigorous investigation of what Walmart's pricing model does to suppliers, workers, and communities. Neither is a polemic. Both are careful. Both conclude that Walton's customer choice argument, that people were free to shop elsewhere, ignores the reality that once the local alternatives are gone, the choice disappears with them. He built something extraordinary. He also declined to look directly at what building it required. Both things are true. Neither one cancels the other out. The most honest accounting of any large enterprise includes both what it built and what it cost. The methodology that drives extraordinary value for one set of stakeholders often extracts value from another. The builder who cannot name both sides of that equation is working from an incomplete map. Walton's defense was genuine and partly correct. Walmart made goods accessible to people who could not previously afford them. The aggregate economic benefit to low-income American consumers is real and measurable. What is also real and measurable is the aggregate economic harm to the communities, suppliers, and workers on the other side of that transaction. The honest version of Walton's legacy holds both simultaneously. This is not moral relativism. It is precision. Understanding what your business builds and what it costs is the minimum requirement for making informed decisions about what to build next. Walton did not lack intelligence or information. He lacked the inclination to look at the side of the ledger that did not contain his customer. That is the honest accounting. Both sides of the ledger, held simultaneously. And now, before we get to the final act of this story, if you want everything we have covered today in a document you can return to, here is where to find it. Jeff Bezos admired Sam Walton. This is documented, not inferred. He kept a copy of Made in America on his desk for years. The Bezos shareholder letters, which became one of the most studied documents in American business history, echo Walton's operating philosophy in language too specific to be coincidental. The obsession with the customer over the competitor. The willingness to be misunderstood for long periods while building a structural advantage. The insistence on building infrastructure before the returns justify it. The 1997 Bezos letter states explicitly that Amazon must be willing to be misunderstood for long periods. Walton said the same thing in different language for 40 years. The Saturday Morning Meeting's descendant is Amazon's weekly business review. Walton's spiral blue notebook is the 6-page memo that Amazon executives must write before any meeting can discuss a major decision, because Bezos, like Walton, believed that the person who processed better information faster would win, and that most meetings are designed to conceal poor thinking behind slides. Bezos founded Amazon in 1994, 2 years after Walton died. He was building, from the beginning, on the model Walton had proven. Find the customer the incumbents have underserved. Build the infrastructure to serve them better than anyone else can. Invest aggressively before the returns justify it. Be willing to operate at near-zero margin until the structural position becomes uncrossable. He applied those principles to digital commerce and cloud computing. The result was the same as when Walton had applied them to physical retail. A moat so wide that by the time competitors understood it, crossing it required resources they did not have. By the time Walmart's leadership recognized Amazon as a serious threat, around 2010, Amazon had a decade-long head start in e-commerce logistics infrastructure and in the customer behavior that infrastructure had produced. Customers who had been shopping on Amazon for 10 years had built habits that Walmart stores could not easily interrupt. The 2-day delivery standard Amazon Prime had established as the customer baseline was one that Walmart's physical store-first model was not designed to meet. The company that had beaten Kmart by building better logistics infrastructure was now watching a competitor build better logistics infrastructure at a speed Walmart could not match. In February 2026, Amazon reported full-year revenue of $716.9 billion. Walmart reported $713.2 billion. Amazon had surpassed Walmart as the world's largest company by revenue for the first time in history. The gap was $3.7 billion. On businesses of that scale, 3.7 billion is a rounding error. It is also the student surpassing the teacher. Walton, it is reasonable to suppose, would have been in Amazon's fulfillment centers in 2005 asking questions. He would have been in the break rooms talking to the workers who packed the boxes. He would have understood, a decade before Walmart's leadership publicly acknowledged it, that one-day delivery was going to become the customer expectation, and that the company that built the infrastructure first would own the behavior. The Saturday morning meeting was reduced to monthly frequency in 2008 and made optional in 2014. The mechanism that had compressed Walmart's information cycle to less than 48 hours was gone. The Amazon threat became existential in part because the company had already removed the system that would have seen it coming. This is the deepest irony in the Walton story. He spent 40 years building a machine that could survive him. The machine did. But the successors, in making it more efficient, made it less alive. They removed the Saturday meeting. They reduced the field intelligence network. They made the machine more comfortable to run. And while they were doing that, a man in Seattle was reading the manual the founder had left behind and building a new machine on the same principles. The principles were never wrong. The machine just needed a new keeper. And the new keeper, when he arrived, had never worked for Walmart and had never met Sam Walton. He had only read his book. Which brings us back to the hospital room. The sales reports in the dying man's hands. The rusted truck in the driveway. And the question this entire episode has been building toward. What does it mean to build a machine that outlasts you? Here is what 47 years actually adds up to. Sam Walton did not build Walmart alone. Bud Walton co-signed the loans when no bank would, and flew his brother between stores for 2 decades. Leland Robson provided the capital that rescued Newport and the 99-year lease that secured Bentonville. David Glass took the machine Walton built and grew it from $16 billion to $165 billion in revenue. These contributions are real. The official story needed one name. History has given it one. A complete understanding requires all of them. Here are the 3 things I want you to walk away with. First, the machine, not the map. Walton did not build a retail chain. He built a machine for making good decisions at scale. The Saturday morning meeting, the distribution warehouses, the satellite network, the truck fleet, the real estate strategy, these are not operational details. They are a system designed to replicate Walton's judgment across an organization he could not personally supervise. Every founder eventually faces the question, what happens to the business when I am not in the room? Walton's answer was to build the room itself. He designed the conditions under which the next 10,000 decisions could be made correctly by people who were not him. The machine kept running after his death, until the successors started removing parts. Second, the information asymmetry is the business. Kmart was larger than Walmart for most of the 1960s. Walmart won not because it became larger faster. Not because its prices were lower, Kmart had low prices too. It won because it knew more faster. The information cycle was 48 hours shorter. On a $100 billion business, 48 hours is worth billions of dollars. This principle has not changed. The company that acts on better information faster wins regardless of scale advantage. Build information infrastructure before you need it. Act on the data before the week is over. And protect the systems that compress your information cycle, because they are worth more than you will know until they are gone. Third, Newport echoes forever. Walton spent 47 years answering the lesson that a landlord in Arkansas taught him in 1950. Never build value inside a structure you don't control. The 99-year lease was the first answer. The owned warehouses were the second. The private trucking fleet was the third. The satellite network was the fourth. Every infrastructure investment Walmart made was a vote against vulnerability. The question every builder should ask of their own business is simple. Where am I building value inside someone else's permission? The answer to that question is the most important thing you will do this year. What does it mean to build a machine that outlasts you? Ask the man whose student eventually beat him. He would have said, that's the whole point. Sam Walton died on April 5, 1992, in Little Rock, Arkansas. At the time of his death, Walmart operated 1,735 stores and 212 Sam's Clubs, employed 400,000 people, and generated $50 billion in annual sales. He had started with $5,000 of his own money and a failing store in a small town nobody else wanted. If you want to go deeper on everything covered in this episode, the 5 sources I would point you to are these. Made in America by Sam Walton is the primary source. Walton wrote it in the months before his death, knowing he was dying. It is one of the more honest accounts by a major founder, partly because he had no reason left to be anything other than candid. In Sam We Trust by Bob Ortega is the unauthorized biography. Ortega covers the labor practices, the supplier relationships, and the community impact that Made in America largely avoids. Read it alongside the memoir for the complete picture. The Walmart Effect by Charles Fishman is the most rigorous investigation of what Walmart's pricing model does to suppliers, workers, and communities. It is not a polemic. It is careful, detailed, and worth your time. Giants of Enterprise by Richard Tedlow places Walton in the context of the 7 great American business builders. The comparative analysis is useful for understanding what is genuinely unique about the Walmart model versus what follows patterns others have demonstrated before. And David Sinra on the Founders Podcast has covered Sam Walton twice, episodes 150 and 234. His episodes focus on the personal obsession and the daily discipline. This episode focused on the structural decisions, the competitors, and the machine. They complement each other. If this episode gave you something worth keeping, the best thing you can do is share it with one person who would get something from it. And if you want to go deeper on any founder story, subscribe to Builders Codex on YouTube and Spotify so you don't miss the next episode. The written companion document for this episode is in the link in the description below. Thank you for listening.